Welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. Now, some feedback and what I've been hearing from a lot of you in the audience and the messages that the page has got is where to invest and how to invest. I'm not going to tell you in this episode the hot spots, but what I would suggest you look into is being a borderless investor. As the saying goes, there's always something growing. Yes, even in interest rates and COVID and all that kind of stuff, you've just got to find it. But how does buying property in different states work? Is it all the same? Are some states similar? Are all states different compared to the one that we live in? What sort of due diligence do I need to do? Well, joining us on this week's episode to cover all this and much more is property lawyer Renee Roumanos. Welcome to the Everything Property Podcast.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
All good, no problems at all. Look, thanks for coming in, and I think really good episode if we want to, what we can run through and the value that we can provide to the audience is buying in different states. Now, this sort of came from a couple of conversations, but one in particular, a gentleman I was speaking to on the Everything Property Instagram page was telling me that he had three investment. His PPR was in Melbourne. He also has three investments all in Melbourne, and I suggested the idea of potentially being a borderless investor and looking at other states. He said, oh, look, I want something that I can drive past. But your issue is, I think, with that is that Melbourne's not always going to grow. There's going to be different markets in Queensland and Adelaide and stuff that are going to grow. You know, Adelaide was the best performer over, regional Adelaide was the best performer over the COVID 3 years. So there's different markets growing at different rates. And so as investors, I think one of the things that we need to learn and get down pat is buying and being comfortable with buying in different states, Renee. So that's where you come into play. But first, before we kick in today's topic, talk to me a little bit about younger Renee Roumanos. And I feel like outside of school and, you know, to go down this legal pathway, there's a fair bit of study involved. Am I right to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Western Sydney. I attended University of Western Sydney, still live in Western Sydney,
Yep.
and now a solicitor in my own practice, which is a really exciting, really amazing thing to be in at this time of my life. And I have two very little children,
Yep.
A 3 and a 4-year-old, so very, very proud and excited at where I am. For me, being a lawyer was all about helping people, protecting people, minimizing risk, and being the person that people rely on when they need things done. And when after COVID happened, I sort of fell into conveyancing, which is a really awesome area of law. And I loved helping people buying and selling property. I operate conveyancing Australia-wide, which really is a great point of difference because not many lawyers can say that they can operate in every single state. So it's really exciting. And on that point, I think, you know, Australia might be one country, but every single state has very, very, very different terms and conditions with respect to conveyancing. So it's really awesome being able to advise clients and handhold them as they do different things in different states. And a little bit about Renee Roumanos Legal.
Yeah.
We're a boutique practice in Southwest Sydney. We are all about doing law differently. We provide legal advice without the jargon, and we're here to help, and we're here to genuinely help every single step of the way.
Was there any law or anyone in your family that sort of pushed you into studying law, or was your sort of decision growing up that you wanted to help and law was going to be the pathway to go down?
I was always a negotiator, and Mum hated that. Mum hated that, you know,
Of course.
bedtime wasn't
Yeah.
9 p.m. or I was always pushing the boundaries or always trying to negotiate, you know, pros and cons out of, you know, particular situations. So I think a big testament to my mum, because she was always like, you're too good of a negotiator. You need to be a lawyer because of this natural negotiation that you just have coming, you know, from your heart. And it's quite funny that I'm one of the first in the family to be a lawyer, which is super duper exciting. But yeah, a big testament to the family for pushing and always telling us to, you know, the world is your oyster, as those woke parents say. The world is your oyster. And yeah, it truly is, which is really amazing.
Okay, perfect. And then you mentioned conveyancing and property law and stuff like that. So you've been in a couple of different sections of law, but what sort of stuck with property? What was the main reason?
Helping everyday people
Yep.
with the everyday legal problem. Buying and selling property is complex, and it does come with a variety of different issues. And for me, it was helping the mums and the dads. It was helping the small business owners. It was helping people moving into their dream homes or grow their property portfolios, because buying property is a really exciting thing. Selling property is a really exciting thing. So it's definitely an area of law that I have a lot of fun in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always fun. There are obviously some, there are always drama with particular things, and you'd be surprised what a pile of rubbish could do on a property and the complex negotiations that might occur thereafter. But yeah, I absolutely love conveyancing. It's a fun area. Some people will disagree, but I definitely really enjoy it.
Okay, fair enough. Look, each to their own. I think lawyers and the amount of study and reading and all that kind of stuff you got to do, like you really got to love it. Otherwise, look. Okay, so let's run through it. We're currently recording this podcast in New South Wales, Australia. But what I want to know in terms of buying a property, how does that start to vary? Well, look, let's go into New South Wales, but how does it start to vary depending on the different states? So in terms of a contract of sale, how is that sort of prepared and how does that work going from state to state?
Absolutely. So thinking about New South Wales, anyone that's seen a New South Wales contract knows that they're generally a good 100 pages. The seller is required to provide so much disclosure in that contract, and it requires so much information. The seller's solicitor prepares that contract of sale. It's typically long, it's complex, and there's a lot to it. Whereas you look at other states such as Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia, and you've got a 5-page contract prepared by a real estate agent, and the due diligence is on the purchaser to conduct their own investigations and find out whatever they can find out about the property. So the risk is very different because you're not given all the information in a very nice pile of a contract. So it's interesting because some people pick up a South Australia contract and there's not much in it at all. If you really look at them properly, there's not much in them. Whereas you pick up a New South Wales contract, you'll know every single easement on a property, you know what's happening in local planning, you know where the sewer lines are. The information is so different. So definitely the contracts is your first point of difference when you look at the different states.
Mm-hmm. So New South Wales is the only state that's got a thick built-out contract with a lot of the due diligence items.
Absolutely. Victoria does have disclosure documents that should be required, but your New South Wales contract is usually the fattest and biggest contract that you'll look at. Okay.
And what about disclosure requirements?
Again, so in New South Wales, disclosure requirements would include things like a 10.7 planning certificate.
Yep.
Now, your planning certificate will tell the purchasers what the zoning is, if there's any hazard risks such as landslip, flood zone, bushfire zone, so forth. And that's a lot of information to give to a purchaser to allow them to make a decision. Whereas you don't get that in Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia. You'd have to go and conduct your own due diligence and obtain those particular certificates yourself. So the process is very different.
Okay, and what about, so only in New South Wales and Victoria that they provide those?
Correct.
What is the timing on getting those things? Because if I'm put offers on and I'm looking to buy and stuff like that, I can't imagine that like everything can be overnight, right?
Absolutely. So in particular contracts such as South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, they have some really fabulous terms which
Talk to me about them.
Subject to finance or subject to building and pest. Now, looking at a subject to finance condition or a subject to building and pest condition, these conditions are magic. And the reason they're magic is because they give the buyer an opportunity to conduct due diligence. Yes, they'll pay a small deposit. However, that deposit will not be lost if they decide to terminate under one of those conditions.
In what state?
In Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia.
Okay, cool.
So you're subject to building and pest and you're subject to finance conditions. They are your magic. You will not get them in New South Wales. You will not get them in Victoria. But they're magic in the other states because they protect the buyer. They give the buyer an opportunity to conduct their own due diligence. And if, for example, the building and pest report says that there is a problem, they can say, hey, don't want to purchase it anymore, give me back my deposit, contract's over, they get to walk away scot-free. So the difference here is in New South Wales, we generally have a 5-day cooling off period under the contract, and purchasers are required to pay a 0.25% deposit. That cooling off period allows them to conduct due diligence. However, if a purchaser decides to rescind at the end of that cooling off period, that deposit is forfeited And that's one of the key differences when you look at the other states is how much will I lose if I decide not to proceed? In New South Wales, you will always lose a 0.25%.
And Victoria?
Yes. Whereas in the other states, you will not. You will retain, if you put down $5,000, you'll get that $5,000 back. So that's why those other states they've got those magic clauses to allow people an opportunity to terminate if they want to and obviously get back their deposit.
Okay, so this is why time is of the essence when we're doing these transactions.
Absolutely. So talking about time is of the essence. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So the most notable difference in Queensland is that time is of the essence. Now, this means the settlement date prescribed in the contract is an essential condition of that contract. And if you fail to settle on that agreed date, the seller can terminate, keep the deposit, sue for damages and specific performance. It is very, very serious. Whereas in New South Wales and Victoria, contracts are not time of the essence. This means, yes, there is a settlement date. However, if a purchaser misses that settlement date for whatever reason, they will pay penalty interest. There will be penalties under the contract, but they can still settle within a number of days.
How's the penalty interest calculated?
So it all depends on the terms of the contract. It's usually between 8 and 10%, and it's 10% on the balance of the purchase price. It works if the property is, say, $1 million, it might be, say, $400 a day. Okay. So that's every single day you're late, you'd pay penalty interest to the seller. However,
that's because you haven't settled, right?
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
And if the seller's solicitor serves a notice to complete, this means time is of the essence and the purchaser has 14 days to settle. If the purchaser does not settle at before the 14-day mark, that contract is then at an end and the innocent party has a right to that deposit back. And that is why it's a really, really scary thing when we're hitting time is of the essence. And I'll tell you a little story.
Please enlighten us.
I had a client purchase in Queensland. He's a New South Wales resident. He very well knows the New South Wales rules. Did not realise Queensland is very different. He bought a $700,000 property. He handed over a 10% deposit. And unfortunately, he missed that settlement day.
Is there any reason why? It was just like
his finance wasn't ready,
okay.
And at the time he had a conveyancer who was not negotiating on his behalf, and we'll talk later about the difference between conveyancers and solicitors.
It was a bit fluffy. Yeah, it was fluffing about.
Absolutely. So in that circumstance, he missed the settlement date and the sellers served a notice saying, see you later, we've taken your deposit and it's ours. And that is the big scary thing in Queensland is if you miss settlement, they can take your deposit and to say goodbye.
He's $70,000.
$70,000. So he came to me and, was freaking out saying, I don't understand. We didn't get a notice to complete.
Yeah.
They didn't serve me anything. So obviously we explained to him that no, Queensland is different. If you miss settlement date and you haven't negotiated anything prior to that period, well, then they can keep your deposit. We did jump in on that one and help him negotiate 50% back of his deposit, and that was only in kindness as a goodwill gesture from the seller that they did give him back $35,000.
Wow.
But it's still a loss, and it's a very, very big loss. So these are one of the, little components where I say, do not look for the cheapest legal representative or the cheapest conveyancers. The amount of times I hear people saying, oh, but that conveyancer was $800. Why can't I just go with them? And I'm like, no. You're buying property. You have a solicitor, someone that can give you legal advice and someone that can negotiate for you if things go wrong. And it's, do not skimp out when it comes to your legal representation of buying a property. It's the biggest transaction you're going to make. You're not buying coffee here. You're buying property. You need the best representation and do not skimp out on that. Yeah,
I mean, if there's things you can cut costs with, if you're renovating that project or something like that, but like pay peanuts, get monkeys. I mean, a really, really good conveyancer. We've had Melina from Coots's who I can't recommend enough as well, but like she saved me tens of thousands of dollars in that transaction. And for that gentleman that you're talking about that missed the settlement in Queensland, well, you've got at least $35,000 back that he wasn't with the other lawyer or conveyancer. So it's like someone that's good in either property lawyer or conveyancer will pay for their money tenfold. So it's like
absolutely
a couple $100. You just got to do it if you listen to this and you're thinking,
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
most solicitors or, conveyancers can tell you horror stories of when things go wrong because purchasers aren't aware of certain things. And I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
In Queensland, the property is at the buyer's risk from 5 p.m. on the first business day after the contract. Now, that means the buyer must take out insurance as soon as they sign a contract.
Okay.
This is essential because if the house is flood affected or, a bushfire comes in and you've signed that contract, it's your property. Even though it's pending settlement, it becomes the buyer's risk.
Oh, so hang on exchange.
On exchange of a Queensland property, a buyer should take out their own insurance.
On exchange and not
Absolutely.
settlement. Okay.
Absolutely. Whereas in New South Wales and Victoria, the property is at the seller's risk up until the settlement date. So when you're in New South Wales and you sign a contract, you are buying it in its current state and condition.
Yep.
If something drastically changes between exchanging contract and settlement, for example, there has been a flood,
fire
or there's been a fire in the residence, or a
Mhm.
tree has fallen on the house, whatever it looks like, that gives purchasers the right to terminate. Whereas in Queensland, they do not have that right. So taking out insurance when you sign a contract in Queensland is mandatory and very important.
Wow.
And these are one of the creative things you can actually negotiate around as long as it's in the contract. So the risk is really high if you don't know what you're signing or you don't understand terms and conditions.
What about the other states?
In South Australia and Western Australia, I believe the risk is on the seller, and Queensland is the only one which the risk is on the buyer.
Oh, okay. And what about, what's the time limit? Like, how long does that, because I'm just thinking, how would that work with me making an offer, it getting accepted, and then me getting insurance in place? Because that's sometimes making the offer, having accepted, and exchanging is quick. But
Absolutely.
like property insurance,
So that's why you have until 5 p.m. on the first business day after that contract is exchanged in order to obtain that insurance.
So you've got to get insurance in like a day.
Correct.
Wow.
And another really
Yeah.
big tip. For anyone buying a property, may I stress an insurance broker to take out that home and contents insurance or the home building insurance. And the reason for that is the everyday layperson will not have the qualifications, the experience and the knowledge to know how much to insure that property for. And that is why an insurance broker is the right person to have in your corner. And if in the circumstance the house has a fire or it goes through a serious event and an insurance claim needs to be made, the last thing property owners want to be doing is ringing insurances to make claims, and that's where the insurance broker will step up and manage that whole process for them, typically without a cost as well. Yep. So I strongly recommend insurance brokers when buying property because they're there to protect the buyer.
In all states too?
Absolutely.
Not just because of Queensland's...
No, every single state, every property requires some sort of home building insurance, and getting it right from the beginning is so important. Obtaining the right level of experience and understanding and correct calculations, may I stress, in that process. I was once victim to a house burning down. Our insurance was not done properly. It was not set up properly. Our quantums were all wrong. And at the end of the day, that risk falls onto the person going through the event. So I will always stress moving forward, getting an insurance broker to manage your insurances because that's your maximum level of protection.
Okay, what happened with that? Did you end up getting enough from the cover that you had it insured it to be able to rebuild, or did you have to sell?
No, we had a really drastic event where our brand new home burnt down. We bought a brand new Sekisui house in May of 2022.
Yep.
And in November of 2022, my house burnt down and I carried my babies out of a burning house. Then I only found out thereafter that we were underinsured by $350,000. And disaster. The builder did not care. The insurance did not care. The bank were happy to say, hey, we're going to take all your insurance money and put it on your loan so that you can then figure out how you rebuild, but we'll protect our loan. So I think the moral of the story is you need to protect yourself as a buyer. It's your obligation, it's your responsibility to ensure that you are adequately protected. And if your house burns down, do you have enough money to rebuild? Do you have enough money to pay for demolition? Do you have enough money, and are you covered for rental? And these are really serious questions, and I was subject to an event myself. I bought a brand new house and it burned down 5 months later.
What was the cause of the fire, do you know?
Electrical.
Oh,
Electrical.
like dodgy wiring, or like a straightener left on?
No, not a straightener. It was something to do with the construction. Something wasn't, the solar was not installed in accordance with the code.
Yeah.
There are several factors surrounding that, but we're currently going through fun legal proceedings, so I won't say too much.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Okay, look, is there any other tips and tricks that you got in terms of due diligence that buyers can do on their property? Talk to me.
Absolutely. Buying a property is a complex, large transaction. It is so important to conduct all due diligence. Review the contract, make sure you understand it. If you're buying in any other state other than New South Wales, make sure you negotiate terms where it is subject to finance, subject to building and pest.
How long can those terms be, by the way?
They're typically between 14 and 21 days.
Wow.
But there's always opportunity to have them extended if you need more time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've had circumstances where people have carried out building and pest inspections and things have come back in those inspections that raise issues, that raise major or minor issues. And I will stress there is always an opportunity to renegotiate price when those things come up. Don't just accept it on face value. Now, in addition to due diligence, if buyers are savvy and they're smart, thinking about a buyer's agent in circumstances where you're buying in a state that's not your state and you're buying a property that you can't see, that you haven't inspected yourself. Buyer's agents are wonderful because they have their own people on the ground in several other states. They do great research. They know which markets are the best markets for capital growth, and there's great leverage and opportunity there for someone with the right wits about them to be able to give the best advice. And I strongly don't recommend typing into realestate.com, I want a cheap house in South Australia, and finding the first thing you see and going and making an offer. So due diligence is key, taking your time to make really good decisions and having the right team around you, the right solicitor, the right broker, buyer's agent, building and pest guy. Having the team and the network of people around you to support good decisions. And if things go wrong, if there's something in a report that doesn't make sense, taking the extra time to understand what that means. So if you see that there's a termite issue, how serious is it? What do we need to know? What is the cost of rectifying this if there is an issue? And I'll stress again, due diligence is key. Taking your time to make good decisions and always having really good legal representation behind you so that you feel supported, you're empowered with information, and you can make the next decisions comfortable, happy, and knowing that you're making the right decisions.
Perfect. Well, look, I usually ask people for some a golden nugget or a piece of advice to share with the audience, but I feel like you have covered it there and throughout the start. But how I usually, I just want to wrap up. I just want to summarize this all as well. If we can go through just quickly from start to finish, so we're all on the same page. So, preparing the contract, how does that differ state to state?
So in Queensland, South Australia, WA, contracts are prepared by real estate agents. They're very brief and the disclosure is on the buyer. It's their obligation to go and conduct due diligence. The seller does not have to give them any information. In New South Wales, in Victoria, contracts are prepared by the seller's solicitor. They are quite substantial contracts and vendor disclosure is mandatory.
Perfect. Okay. Talk to me about exchange, cooling off and settlement.
Absolutely. So in New South Wales, a standard contract allows for a 5-day cooling off period. This is generally when a purchaser pays their 0.25% deposit and they have an opportunity to go and conduct due diligence. If they do terminate, they forfeit that deposit. Whereas this is different to Queensland, South Australia and WA, whereas those contracts are subject to conditions. They also have a cooling off period, but the subject to conditions allow a specific period of time that the purchaser can conduct due diligence or seek rectification or ask questions or even seek a price reduction. But that must all occur in the subject to period. If a purchaser decides not to proceed in Queensland, South Australia or WA, if they terminate that contract, they will get back their deposit. The risk is much more minimised.
Amazing. And also insurance requirements.
So in New South Wales and Victoria, the property is at the seller's risk up until settlement day, whereas in Queensland, the property is at the buyer's risk from the first business day after the contract.
Okay. Well, look, that's a good summary. But what are some of the things that you've picked up? So you mentioned the story that you had a gentleman that sort of came to you after he had paid a 10% deposit and had missed settlement. But is there anything that you've sort of picked up over your time in the years and looking at all these contracts for people to look out for, or that have been reasons for you to, or for your clients to be able to pull out of the contracts?
Absolutely, every single day.
Yeah, tell me.
I'm very big on minimising risk. I've got big, I'm always the one trying to flag issues if there are any. I have lots of clients buying through self-managed super funds and through trusts and various bits and pieces. And I'll tell another story. Mm-hmm. So I had an older client who was buying in South Australia. They were buying through a self-managed super fund. They had their $400,000 ready to go. Mm-hmm. And they found a particular property that had a really good rental yield that was going to pay them the weekly rent that they were planning to live off. And they did have a buyer's agent who probably isn't my favourite one in the world at the moment, but this particular buyer's agent was pushing them on buying it. Yeah. And I was like, sorry, let's just take our time. We need a building and pest inspection. We're not buying anything without proper due diligence.
Can you tell me the buyer's agent, but I'll blur it out so people at home...
No.
Okay.
No.
Worth a try.
We'll do that later. So... In this circumstance, I was pushing on, no, we are getting a building and pest inspection. No one's buying anything without one. And we obtained an inspection, and may I say it was atrocious. It contained lots of issues that were major problems throughout the property. And I remember the buyer's agent ringing me saying, oh, can you just be fluffy about the report? Because I know there's a few, minor issues. And I was like, sorry, but damping in the ceiling is not a minor issue. If the property's got mould, that's not minor, that's quite major. And it had several other issues. And in this circumstance, I had to sit down with the buyers and go through this report and say to the buyers, I don't think this is your property. And the reason being is to rectify all these problems is a substantial cost that you don't have. And if you don't have the dollars to fix it, and nor are you ready, willing and able to rectify these problems, you're buying this property at a risk because you buy it in its current state and condition, subject to any defects, and those defects are there. So if in the circumstance you buy it, you're accepting that problem, and that problem is then yours. And in this particular circumstance, we did terminate this contract. The buyers got back their deposit and they found something else which was much better and came with much...
With the same buyer's agent?
No, a different buyer's agent this time.
Thank God.
But what was really great about this one is this particular buyer went off and bought something that was brand new. Mm-hmm. So rather than buying a really old house, he was creative and bought something brand new. When you buy brand new, there's lots of tax benefits, and brand new typically, other than my property, mean lesser problems. And you... Sorry.
Yeah, true.
So buying brand new comes with some great, conditions such as defect clauses, and you're getting a brand new property, great tax benefits there. So this particular buyer obviously changed their tune and bought something very different. But again, due diligence is key, doing your homework, making sure that you are informed as a buyer before you do anything else.
Talk to me a little bit about house and land packages and new housing estates, because someone quite close to me sort of got caught up in a house and land package in Brisbane.
Yep.
And there was some issues with their design, because not only was it subject to council approval, it was also subject to the developer approval.
Absolutely. Design controls.
Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about them.
Absolutely. So I am an off-the-plan specialist. We love off-the-plans in our practice. Mm-hmm. Typically, they come in two contracts. You will have your land contract and your separate build contract. Typically, what that means is you are buying a property subject to and conditional upon a subdivision of land. Mm-hmm. This basically means there's a large parcel of land and it's going through, a developer is subdividing it, turning it into an estate, and the land contract is subject to all those things happening. Settlement will then occur once the registration of that subdivision has occurred.
Is it usually sorry to cut you off, is it usually a sunset clause in there for the subdivision
Absolutely.
to be approved?
So a sunset date is the last indicative date that developer can hand over that lot of land. Mm-hmm. It gives both the developer an opportunity to terminate, and most importantly, it gives the purchaser an opportunity to terminate. But typically you will find that the estimated completion will be in 1 year or 2 years, and the sunset date will typically be another 2 years down the track. And it's like that to protect the developer. It's something we see in all the states. We see it a lot in southwest Sydney with all the new land development that's happening down there. You drive through Oran Park, Spring Farm, Wilton, Tarmore, you keep driving southwest, and there's all these new lots of land development. And every single land development has design controls. And that basically means the developers are governing what sort of property or house you can build on that land. They will typically tell you you can have 2 types of roofs. They need to be this colour. You can have these 2 types of garages. They need to be this colour. You cannot have a front porch. It has to be brick. And if it's not brick, it's got to be this type of cladding. You definitely couldn't have anything else. You have to have a driveway and it's got to be on this side. So they're very strict about those terms and conditions. Typically, when you settle on the land contract, buyers will pay a compliance bond to the developer, and they will only get back that bond when their house complies with the rules. So this is why it's so important to ensure that the builder understands what those design rules are, so that everyone is in conformity to what it needs to be in order to get that compliance bond back and meet the requirements.
So if you're getting someone to design, if I'm just buying a house, I really need to be sending that land contract over to the architect so that they can hit those design requirements.
Absolutely. And there's so much risk when you're entering into a build contract. You hear about it every second day that another builder is in liquidation and another builder is going bust.
Yep.
So how do buyers protect themselves? Because when you enter into a land contract, you're typically paying 5%.
Mm-hmm.
The money is not in trust. It's in the builder's hands. How do you protect yourself? So this is where homeowners warranty insurance is so important. When anyone is signing a builder's contract, it is essential to ensure that they have homeowners warranty insurance as well, which is something the builder must take out in order to protect the buyer. And homeowners warranty insurance will step up in circumstances where a builder has gone bust,
Yep.
or a builder has disappeared, or there's major defects that can't be fixed. That's when that insurance will step up. And I think it was last year sometime, there was a small builder in South Australia whom I probably had about 20 clients with this builder who went bust. Luckily for us, the builder did have his homeowner warranty insurance for every single one of those properties, and as a result, they got back their deposits, and then they were able to then go and find another builder to do the work. But that is why taking your time to read contracts,
Yep.
have a lawyer explain them to you, ensure that you're protected is so important. The amount of times I have clients coming to me afterwards when a problem arises and said, here's this dodgy contract that I signed with person A, dodgy, what are my rights? And it's crazy because I said, if you brought this to any lawyer prior to signing it, they wouldn't have let you sign such a horrible agreement because your rights are quite minimized. So may I stress, before you sign any legal agreements, before you hand money over, pay the few $100s and have a lawyer review the contract and explain to you what terms are normal and what terms should be negotiated. Because when you're entering into a contract with the builder, the most important features are the price,
Yep.
the quality, how long it will take, and what the ramifications are if it takes longer. Because typically it's someone's investment property, and if the contract says it's going to take 200 days for the builder to build, and they go over that period, the buyer should be compensated. And there's ways around that, and of course there's always circumstances that arise that are outside of the control of the builder, but having a really good solid contract in place beforehand minimizes risks, protects the buyer, and hopefully keeps everyone uniform and in line.
And happy. That builder's warranty insurance.
Yes.
Is that I haven't built in every state, so is that applicable across all states as well?
Yes, Home Building Association Australia.
Yep.
There is a it's a little bit different in every state, but generally it's the same. Homeowners warranty insurance. If anyone is building a property with any builder, they should have insurance in place in order to protect them. And if things go wrong, you'll be tapping into that insurance policy.
Perfect. And the builder needs to take that out and show you before you sign any contract.
Absolutely. There's always these sneaky ways builders try and do things. And here's a hot tip.
Yep.
If a builder hands you a preliminary services agreement, that deposit is typically not covered under homeowners warranty insurance.
What's a preliminary services agreement?
It's basically
for everyone watching at home?
A preliminary services agreement is the agreement before the building contract.
Mhm.
You find lots of builders being sneaky and trying to put a 5% deposit under this shonky agreement that doesn't give people many rights.
Mm-hmm.
And if a buyer tries to terminate under this contract, they forfeit that deposit. Whereas if you try and terminate under a builder's contract because you can't meet an essential term of that contract, such as you're not proceeding with the land or you can't satisfy the finance conditions, then you get back that deposit. So your level of protection is very different.
Okay. The more you know. There you go. What are some other terms that builders or developers sneak in that are that you sort of advocate against or to be taken out for your clients?
Oh, the one I really don't like is builder's margin. So they say in all these contracts that the build price is $500,000 per se, but then they've got all these other sneaky clauses and conditions that say the builder can actually charge up to 30% more than that price. Or they have other terms and conditions that say if you change anything, we'll charge you $1,000 administration fee. So if I change my door handles from black to gold, I'm also not just paying for the different product, but I'm now paying all these additional administration costs just to make small changes. So I think there's so many things to look out for. And of course, taking your time to do your research before you enter into a contract. Mm-hmm. Do not go for the cheapest price. Research the builder, research the developer, understand what they're about. Are they a big company? What projects have they done before? Do they have a good reputation? If I Google them, how many negative things am I going to read? You'd be surprised what Google reviews can do and how much you can understand about a company from their clients telling a story.
Very true. Look, to wrap up, Renee Roumanos, what is a quote you live your life by?
Ooh, what a tough one. Anyone that knows me knows I love Mickey Mouse. I love Disney. And of course, my favorite quote is going to be Disney. And it is, laughter is timeless, imagination has no age, and dreams are forever.
Perfect. What a good note to end on. Look, thank you so much for coming in on the Everything Property podcast. And this has been a really insightful episode. And I think it's going to help a lot of people who are thinking and looking borderless and looking, in New South Wales, looking across the other states and from the other states looking into New South Wales and everywhere else to be able to understand how to buy in other states and all the implications to follow. So really thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And if anyone is interested, please feel welcome to contact me. I'd be more than happy to assist in your buying journey.
Perfect. For anyone that wants to get into contact with Renee, I will drop her contact details in the show notes. So make sure you check it out if you want to get in touch.